Oh, okay. Oh. So is the slides moving? I'm not speaking. So can you hear me now? Is it everything okay?
Yes. Okay.
How about the slides? Is it moving?
Up right now.
I'll share. I can play again. Right now?
Yeah, but it's up now. Yes, it works fine.
Is it moving?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Hi, Penguin.
How are you doing there?
Hi. Can you hear me?
มองกล้องนี่ครับมองกล้องนี่ครับ Yes, I hear you.
Yeah. It's been very long time. Yeah.
เสียบได้ไหมครับขยับมาอีก
Hello, Sam. Hi. Can you hear me? Hello. Hey. Okay.
นะครับขอบคุณ
movement in Taiwan and Thailand. This event here is co-organized by Samyang Fest and Taiwan Foundation for Democracy, Chiron Taiwan, and also the Political Science Student Union in Chulalongkorn University. So on our panel here today, we have four honorable guests. Dr. Fang Yu from the Department of Political Science from Suzhou University in Taiwan, and Fei Fan Lin, who is the Deputy Secretary General of the Democratic Progressive Party of Taiwan, Kun Parit Vacharasi, who is the Policy Campaign Manager of the Move Forward Party, and Kun Parit Shiwala, who is a prominent student activist of the Rasadon movement. So we'll start with Dr. Fang Yu. I'll briefly introduce. Fang Yu is an assistant professor of political science at Suzhou University, Taiwan. His research topics delves into authoritarian politics, party politics, and political behavior in new democracies, as well as U.S., China, and Taiwan relations. Since 2014, he co-founded and is co-editing the website Who Governs TW, which aims to become a Mandarin version of Monkey Cage, promoting public awareness and participation on politics. He is also in the editorial team of U.S. Taiwan Watch, which report issues related to U.S., Taiwan, and China relations. For Dr. Fang Yu, I'll ask.
Oh, they disappeared.
Sorry, but I think we have to move due to COVID restrictions. So that's kind of a startup event here. And so what makes Taiwan different from other countries who have democratized or is trying to democratize, and why has Taiwan like overcame that challenge?
Oh, so am I going to go first? Oh.
Because I think Fang Yu, I think you are, yeah.
So I'm the first. Okay.
Yeah, I guess.
Thank you very much. Let me share my slide. Yeah, and today I'm going to talk briefly about the Taiwan story of democratization, and it's my pleasure to join this talk. Due to the pandemic, I think there are pros and cons. One of the pros is that we can share with each other our viewpoints by online meeting. So I think it's very good because we don't have to fly. Although I have to admit that I really miss the day that I traveled to Bangkok. I like Thailand very much, and I miss the day that we can travel freely. And I hope that we can meet in person soon. Okay. So what makes Taiwan so special? I don't think Taiwan is special because Taiwan is just one of the cases of a successful democratization. And I think every cases of democratization needs a lot of efforts by people and by political leaders. So basically, in general, there are two approaches of democratization. One is top-down, and the second is bottom-up. So generally, the political scientists categorize Taiwan into the first one, that is top-down. So it is elite-led. There are some elite-led reform, and the elite triggers the reform and then democratize and then hold the elections. However, even though it is a top-down approach, people's efforts are still very, very important because there are a lot of bottom-up social movements and a lot of demands from people and also from people who cooperate internationally, so that the leaders has the pressure to open up, to liberalize, and then to democratize. And there's a key leader is Li Denghui, and I will introduce him later. So this is a very brief timeline about Taiwan's democratization. After 1945, the end of the Second World War, it is also the end of Japan colony. And then Taiwan come into the occupation of the Kuomintang, the Chinese Nationalist Party, the then ruling party in the mainland China. But there was a civil war, and the KMT was defeated in mainland China by China's Communist Party until now. So KMT rebuilt a government in Taiwan. This is very special. It is very unique. I think there's no chance for the defeated side in the civil war that they can have a fresh start in another place. So I think this is the only the very special part of Taiwan. And after that, in 1950, the Korean War broke out. And then the US decided to help the dictator Chiang Kai-shek to consolidate the rules in Taiwan. So it begins the long-term martial law until 1987, almost 4 decades of martial law. It's a very, very long time. So under the martial law, there are waves of social movements that people demand democratization, and people demand social reform, and people did a lot of things, both inside and in the international politics. And Taiwan had the first presidential election in 1996. So it's a long process of the movements for struggle for democratization. There are some obstacles and challenges that Taiwanese the activists must overcome. So the first one is the Cold War. So under the Cold War, the US decided to help various allies, so-called allies, no matter whether they are democracy or not. So because their priority is to contain the communist parties. So US gave the dictator Chiang Kai-shek a lot of economic and military aid, so that Chiang Kai-shek can consolidate the power. And also the Taiwanese people can develop their economy and then build up a very good place in Taiwan. So it's there are pros and cons there. And then it is a typical case of modernization theory, which means that when the economy grows up, then more and more people started to becoming more and more educated, and then they have some money, and they increasingly demand for political participation. So it is a theory of modernization. It is a typical case of modernization theory in Taiwan. But the KMT is very wise. I mean, they are very good at building up political supports in the very local level in Taiwan. So So the KMT case is very similar to like PRI in Mexico, also Golkar in Indonesia, and the National Front in Malaysia. So there are some dictators who are very good at building up local party organizations, and then they just extend their political support in the very local level, so that their influence can persist even after democratization. So this is a case of Taiwan. So the party machine works very well in all levels, in the remote areas, and in every village in Taiwan. So there are party branches, and of course they use the funding from the government and from the from the government. So you can say that they are unlimited in their resources, so that they can buy for more support from people. So there are some theories or researches that tell us how democratization succeeds, and I like this one the most. The title is Competitive Authoritarianism. So basically, it says that besides the very basic condition is of people's demand of political participation. So it is very easy to understand that more and more people have to express their demand and give the leaders more pressure, so that the leaders will try to satisfy the needs of the people. And so the leader has to come up with some reforms. But the most important or the most major pressure is from a foreign country, especially the US. So for example, we all know that the power between people and the government is asymmetrical. So the government has the gun, has the power, has the bureaucratic power and everything. So people rarely have the ability to overturn the government or overturn the leader. But for the Taiwanese case, so the US is a major ally or major aid origins from. So so many social activists will seek the help or seek alliance from the US, especially the US Congress. So for example, the US Congress made some resolutions to urge the dictators in Taiwan to open up for the freedom of speech and the freedom of organizing the parties. So there are some formal resolutions from the US, and the US has a lot of leverage there. So the US will say that if you do not do some reforms, then we will stop the arms sales to you. It is very severe to Taiwan because it is the only national security help that comes from the US because of the China's pressure. So the US has a lot of leverage against Taiwan, against the dictators. So the US can make similar that kinds of resolutions and give a lot of pressure on Taiwanese dictator. So the rule number one is that there's no kind of good dictator that will voluntarily give up his own power. Almost every case of democratization or liberalization or the liberal reforms coming from various kinds of pressures, especially from international actors or from domestic uprisings. So it is not possible for a dictator to voluntarily give up or do some reforms. It is all that the people must do it, must struggle for it very and with a lot of efforts. So that is the key. So another key is that there must be some power. There must be some power struggle in the high level. So here comes Li Denghui. So Li Denghui, that time under dictatorship, he was the vice president of the last dictator Jiang Jingguo. Why he was selected as the vice president? It is because he is perceived as the least threatened political figure. So every power, the political strongman in KMT do not think he will threaten to their power. So he is selected as the vice president. Then after Jiang Jingguo dies, he became the president. And he started to cooperate with strongmen and to defeat another strongman again and again. And another key is that a civilian control of the government and civilian control of the military, that will ensure that the military do not take back the power after democratization or after the election. So Li Denghui cooperates with social movement leaders, and I think it's very wise. So he appointed a political strongman, a military strongman, as a premier. And then all of the societies, especially the social movements, come together and against that military strongman, so that Li Denghui can do some reforms to make the civilian that can control over the military. So that is a key. So because the military often, in a lot of cases, that will take back the power after democratization. So, and also then Li Denghui started to do the constitutional amendment that makes democratization as institutionalized and make them into constitution. That is very important. So although we say that it is successful, I mean, yeah, it is successful in Taiwan that we democratized in the 1990s and without political violence. So it is successful. We can say that it is successful, but there's some cost of this top-down approach. Yeah, because it is elite-led. So it triggered and carried out by Li Denghui, the political insider of the dictatorship. There's no transitional justice. That is the old elites all stay in their original position after democratization. So because the political leader, Li Denghui, has to make a lot of compromises with these old elites, so that to make sure that they do not want to take back their power, or they do not overturn democratization. So it is a cost, and yeah, although it's beneficial because there's no violence, but we still have to pay off this cost. So after 2 or 3 decades of democratization, we see it is very slow in some areas, like the judicial reform or some other kinds of dimensions, that it is very slow. So there are some successful dimensions, also some costs of this approach. I will leave the time to other speakers and will join the Q&A section later. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. As Dr. Chen highlighted that it requires multiple pressures in order to force democratization. So we'll give the time to our second speaker, Fei Fan Lin, who will focus more on the social movements in Taiwan. So Fei Fan is one of the leaders of Taiwan's Sunflower Movement in 2014. He started his student activism since 2008, the Wild Strawberry Movement, and also participated in the anti-media monopoly movement in 2012, and many other civil movements. So the question we want to ask Mr. Fei Fan Lin is, when did Taiwan's social movement first begin? What did it drive for, and how was it different from current social movement in terms of goals, tactics, organization, etc.?
Okay. Yeah, it's really good to join this panel. Then I'm pretty honored to join the discussion with you and to share the thoughts and ideas about Taiwan's democracy and recent social movement as well. And actually, Penguin and we met in 2016 when we first established a group called NOIDA, Network of Young Democratic Asians. So it's really good to see him online, and I hope one day he can come back to Taiwan again and to visit us. Yeah. So just first want to send some of my greetings to Penguin, and just follow up what Fang Yu just mentioned, the story of Taiwan's democracy. That while the social movement has many different streams in Taiwan, we got a lot of different threads of social movement, different types of social movement. If you look at just what Fang Yu just mentioned, that in the past decades, not just the past decades, during the age of authoritarian rule in Taiwan, that there are a couple of different social movements that is actually one is actually based on demand of democratization, and I think that another thread of social movement is social progress, so to speak. So what is inside of the social progress social movement? You can see that there are a lot of labor movements, environmental movements, females or gender equality movements, and also indigenous people's rights movement in Taiwan. So I think during the 80s that there are a couple of different social movements that triggers the whole social reforms and facilitate the change of the government, and also help the just as Fang Yu mentioned, that help President Li Denghui to consolidate or cooperate with the civil societies and push certain reform agenda. So we can see that in the past, in 80s, that there are a lot of different demands of movements, different types of social movements. And their tactics also have some differences as well, but mainly because during that time in 80s, that's more the whole society and the whole environment of Taiwanese political environment is more conservative. So there are a lot of progressive ideas that you need to use some kind of protest. It's like just direct come from the police. You can see that there's a couple of famous movement, like in 1989 there was an agricultural peasant movement. Actually, they launched and protest that greatly have a very strong backlash with the police, and also a lot of conflicts between the civil society and the police force. So that's during the late 80s. But entering 90s, the social movement become more and more peaceful. That is especially when the university students become main actors of the social movements. As you can see, during 1990s, there is a very important student movement called the Wild Lady student movement in 1990s. So their demands was to amend the constitution, to amend the constitution, and to seek for certain reforms on setting the timetable for political reforms. And they directly have a direct dialogue with the former president Li Denghui. And so they met Li Denghui and to make that certain demands. And those demands are actually being accepted by President Li. So you can see that there's the whole momentum of the social movement becomes more and more peaceful. And somehow you can say it's more mature, that people are not using a more violent, the violent way to do the protest, and it becomes more moderate. So I think that also changed the whole civil society's culture as well, that the whole culture becomes more, just as I say, peaceful, moderate, and somehow people believe that we should follow some certain social rules to conduct a demonstration or protests and to get more support from the general public. And when we enter the 90s, that democratization became the main theme of Taiwan's political progress. That you can see that the DPPs come out, just established in the late 80s and become opposition parties, the major opposition parties during the 90s, and even win some seats in municipal levels. For example, in 1994, it's the first time the DPP as an opposition party that win the capital. So the first DPP's candidates being selected as a Taipei city mayor is actually in 1994. And follow up this kind of change in 1996 that we have the direct presidential election. The DPP also have the candidates to represent us. That's in the first direct presidential election. So the whole change in the 90s, it become peaceful, moderate democratization is the main theme of our democracy. I think that there are. I just want to also add some point about the differences between Taiwan and Thailand. You know that actually we are two countries that are usually being how to say, some people cannot identify which is Thailand, which is Taiwan. It's a very funny story, but somehow it's a reality of, I mean, in the international community. So some people don't know where's Taiwan. People probably know Thailand, but somehow they confuse these two countries. But I think both of those, we are young democracy, and somehow the situation, well, there are some similarities and also differences. I would say the similarity is the trajectory or the track we are pursuing democracy is quite similar. That Thailand also faced a certain wave of democratization movement, but there is some backlash from the authoritarian military government as well. But while Taiwan didn't face that seriously, but we also face some kind of outside pressures, especially from China. So that's the biggest difference between Taiwan and Thailand. So if I can, I'm able to define Thailand and Taiwan. I would say Thailand is in a position to urge for democratization right now. But for Taiwan is now trying to maintain our democracy and trying to preserve our democracy under the threat of authoritarian expansionism. You can see that while there is a common ground for Thailand and Taiwan as well, that the current geopolitical environment is greatly be changed by the authoritarian expansion. You can see that China right now, they are pursuing to militarize the South China Sea. They are going to pursue their dominant power in the Indo-Pacific region and especially in Southeast Asia through Belt and Road Initiative. And they're doing everything they can to coerce other democratic countries and try to undermine the democratic institutions. And they also try to promote authoritarian government model. That's quite essential for both Taiwan and Thailand. Well, we know that Thailand right now has a military government. We don't, I actually don't know how much inspiration they got from the rule of China. I mean, the Chinese model. But I do see that there's a threat direct from China when they are promoting this kind of militarized or authoritarian-minded governance model. That's something that certainly will have effects in Southeast Asia and Indo-Pacific region. So that's a common, I think there is a common ground for Taiwan and Thailand to discuss how to tackle these issues. And the democratic activists or different political force or younger generation, we can still have rooms and a lot of different discussion on this and to pursue the common progress of democracy in the Indo-Pacific region and especially in Southeast Asia. Yeah, so I think I will end the answer this round here and to hear more your questions. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. Next we'll go to Khun Parit Wacharasingh, who is the policy campaign manager at Move Forward Party. Khun Parit is active in trying to promote amending and drafting a new constitution in Thailand. He also was active in the movement to push against involuntary military drafting in Thailand. So the question, Harry, is as a political party member and having been active, especially in several movements, perhaps also could you have shared for us some experiences that you've done before, and how can you support the social movement now, now that you're active in a political party? Thank you very much.
Sure. Okay, well, thank you very much for having me on this panel. You can hear me clearly, right?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, thank you. Yes, thank you. So I think to answer that question about kind of how we as kind of a political party can help support the social movement for democracy in Thailand, let me kind of split my answer into two parts. I think the first part, let me try and give an overview, especially for our international audiences, about the current state of democracy in Thailand, where we are currently right now, and what are the challenges that we are currently facing. And then the second part will be about how kind of we as a political party, which is I guess one organ of the political structure, can help push forward the agenda that society is trying to call for. So I think in the first part, in terms of the state of democracy, I always begin with this statistic, which every time I ask Thai students or Thai youth and Thai population, it always surprises them. So I always ask kind of in the latest ranking of democracies around the world in the Democracy Index of 2021, out of 167 countries across the world, where do they think Thailand lies in that ranking? So how democratic they think Thailand is compared to the rest of the world? And when I give that, the answer actually is 72nd. So somewhere around the middle of the table. It always surprises everyone, because everyone always thinks that the state of democracy is actually worse than that kind of mid-table ranking would lead people to believe. And I think the underlying reason behind that is not that people have the wrong perception of the state of democracy in Thailand. I mean, the state of democracy in Thailand is actually very fragile as they perceive. But if you delve deeper into that ranking and the methodology that the Democracy Index calculates, I think then you start to see a picture. Because when the Democracy Index evaluates countries in terms of how democratic each country is, they give a score out of 10 across 5 dimensions. And these 5 dimensions can actually be split into, I would say, 2 very broad groups. The first group is measuring based on criteria in terms of how democratic the system is. So the laws, the constitution, the regulations that govern the country, how democratic it is, how much does it really give power to the people. And then the second group, or the second part, are actually criteria that measures how democratic the society is. So regardless of how the laws are written, how democratic is the society, how much do people believe in democracy, how much do they understand democracy, how much do they want to push for democracy. And in Thailand, what you see is actually very interesting, because even though the average score is about 6.04 out of 10, you will see that on the left, on the first part, which is the measures or the scores given for how democratic the system is, the score is much below 6. So on things like how well functioned the government is in terms of responding to the needs of the people, they score 5 out of 10. On the protection of civil liberties, it's 5.29 out of 10. So it's below average. Whereas on the other side, in terms of the criteria regarding how democratic the society is, we see that the score on political participation is about 6.67 out of 10. The score on political culture is about 6.25 out of 10. So you basically have this gap between how democratic the system is and how democratic the society is. And I think that's why people, the Thai people who have very high expectations of how democratic that country should be are very surprised when they see that the ranking is somewhere in the mid-table, because the state or the system is actually very undemocratic right now. Right? And so I think for me to kind of put into picture what the state of democracy in Thailand is right now, I see it as like a game of tug of war, right? So on the one hand, you have the system that is very undemocratic and regressive. It's becoming less and less democratic compared to what it was 10 or 20 years ago. But on the other hand, you have a progressive society that is trying to push the country forward, push the country the other way, and make it become more and more democratic. Right? Now, to go into the underlying forces between this kind of push and pull between a regressive system and a progressive society. If you go on the regressive system, I think there are two main sources as to why our democratic system is regressing right now. The first source is actually the constitution. So right now, since 2017, Thailand has been living under the 2017 constitution. And I think if you look at the origin, the process of how it came about and the contents of the constitution, you will see that it falls well short of global democratic standards. I mean, it was drafted by a committee set up by the military government back in 2014 to 2017. It then was passed through a referendum in 2016, but it was a referendum that was neither free nor fair. The people who wanted to oppose the draft were not allowed to campaign freely. Many were arrested. The questions that were posed on the ballot were very leading and complex by design. And then if you look at the content, and this is probably the biggest problem that we are currently facing right now, which is the content of constitution has created certain mechanisms to ensure that the military government and the people associated with it can continue to stay in power, regardless of whether they are able to get the democratic mandate of the majority of the population. And specifically, there are three mechanics that the current constitution has embedded into Thailand's political system. The first one is the use of the senators. So Thailand currently has a bicameral parliamentary system. So we have a lower house that is populated by 500 MPs who are all elected. And then we have the upper house, which is 250 senators who are appointed by the military government. Now, the fact that they are appointed is one democratic shortfall. But I think the biggest problem is that not only are they appointed, but they have a huge amount of power in terms of dictating how the country is run. So the current 250 senators have the power to vote on who becomes prime minister alongside the 500 MPs, which means that the election does not really respect the fundamental principle of one person, one vote, because at the end of the day, in the vote for who becomes prime minister, one senator has an equivalent amount of vote as one MP, but one MP comes from 70,000 votes, right? So in a way, one senator has an equal amount of power as 70,000 people put together, and 250 senators who are appointed by the military government has a power that's equal to 19 million voters, right? So that's one. But beyond that, to amend this constitution, even if you get the support of all 500 MPs, you still cannot amend the constitution unless you get the support of a third of the senators, which is why in the past 3 years, there have been more than 20 drafts that have been presented to parliament to try to amend the constitution, but only one passed, and that was to do with the electoral system. None of the drafts that tried to touch on the power and the origin of the Senate actually passed, because they did not get enough votes from the senators, right? Because not enough of them would allow for there to be an amendment to reduce their own power. So therein lies the problem. The second mechanic then is the Constitutional Court and the independent bodies like the Electoral Commission and the National Anti-Corruption Commission. There are bodies which you would expect to perform a neutral role, right? And be almost the referees of the political system that are neutral to all sides. But their neutrality is being heavily questioned because of their origins and the way they are selected. Because to be one of the justices on the Constitutional Court or to be one of the committee members of these independent bodies, you have to be ratified and approved by the majority of the senators. So in a way, you have the military government that appointed the senators who then appoint who becomes the Constitutional Court justice or committee members of these independent bodies, which is why every time there's a verdict that's given by the Constitutional Court, or every time there are certain mishandlings during the hosting of elections, whether at national level or at local level, people start to question the neutrality of these bodies because they have an appointments process that is not neutral by design. Right? And then the third mechanic is, in Thailand, we have what we call a 20-year strategy, which on surface may sound a bit harmless. I mean, some people may question whether it's actually worthwhile doing a 20-year strategy when we are currently living in a world that is changing day by day. But the real danger of it is that there are certain articles in the constitution that stipulates that if an elected government comes into power with the mandate of the people via elections, but does not conduct policies that are in line with the 20-year strategy, then they can be forced out of office, right? And if you look at who would make that decision in terms of whether that policy is in line with the 20-year national strategy or not, are people like the senators, the independent bodies who, familiar names that I just mentioned before. So that is kind of the crux of the problem right now, which is the Constitution has embedded these mechanics, whether it's the senators, whether it's the Constitutional Court and independent bodies, or the 20-year national strategy, which are used by design to extend the powers of the military government, regardless of whether they have popular mandate from the people or not. The second source of the regressive system are actually kind of institutions that are not necessarily included in the Constitution, but have kind of, I guess, invisible powers to dictate how Thailand politics develop. And I think one of that is the military, right? I mean, obviously the most obvious interference into politics by the military are when they stage military coups. But even during periods where there are no military coups, there are certain regulations that allow for the military to still have influence in terms of how Thailand's politics is conducted, right? So for example, a lot of times you see that the decisions that are made by the Ministry of Defense are not made by the minister that comes from a civilian government, but a lot of it is made by what we call the military parliament, or in Thai we call it Sapa Kalahom, who are filled by senior members of the military and very few members that are from the kind of the elected government. And I think we are seeing multiple times where the military personnel have come out and spoken or made political statements that seem to be in favor of one political side instead of maintaining the neutrality. So I guess the agenda to separate military from politics is something which is still needed in Thailand. So that's on the one side of the equation. But on the other side, we have a progressive society. So we are seeing the people becoming more aware, becoming more demanding of having a full democratic system in Thailand, right? I think one part is to do with technology, which enable people to more freely share their opinions, to get access to information that is not monopolized by the state. It also enables them to form together, via certain hashtags or via certain online groups to make certain demands and then make their voices louder. And then I think what we're seeing is that beyond that kind of that use of technology, we are also seeing the younger generations calling for democracy, not just in terms of a democratic system that has free and fair elections, but they're also calling for policies that embody democratic values of equality and liberty. So they're not just calling for free and fair elections. If you go to the protests in Thailand, you're not just seeing demands on a new constitution, but you're also seeing demands on things like equal marriage bill, which embodies that notion of equality. Or you're seeing demands for things like abolishing military conscription, which is embodying that value of liberty and the freedom to choose your own profession. So that's kind of where we are right now in terms of the state of democracy in Thailand. It's a push and pull between a regressive system and a progressive society. And I think let me end a little bit quickly on the second question. I'll try not to go over time too much, which is how then as a political party can we help push forward the society and make it become more progressive and more democratic. I think the problem statement for us, I mean, given that we are part of that political system, is how do we translate the needs of the progressive society and make sure that that gets incorporated into the considerations and the decision making in the system. And then how then do we then lift the system to be able to catch up with these demands and walk forward together with the progressive society and ensure that society still retains the faith in these political institutions. Because if we're not able to translate the demands outside parliament into parliament, if we're not able to lift the system to move forward together with society, then people are going to lose hope that parliament can be an avenue of change. And I think if people lose hope in the parliamentary system, then we are walking to unknown territories. Right? So I think for us, that's kind of what we are trying to do, to try and ensure that parliament can still be a place of hope for people who want to see change. And I think there are 3 or 4 things we can do. Number one is we need to be very firm in terms of protecting the freedom, rights and liberties of the people outside parliament. So most fundamentally, people, regardless of no matter who you are, must be able to freely express their opinion and freely assemble to push for their demands, right? So things like any laws that are currently an obstacle to freedom of expression, whether it's Article 112, Article 116, Computer Crimes Act needs to be amended or abolished. Any emergency decrees or regulations that are obstructing the freedom of assembly, so things like the use of the current emergency decree law needs to be reviewed. Any potential new laws that could be that could put the Thailand at risk of not being able to protect the right of civil society organizations. For example, the upcoming the so-called anti-NGO bill that is currently being considered by the cabinet needs to be repealed or revoked. So I think that's the first one as an agenda for us as a political party, is that we need to protect the civil rights and liberties of everyone, regardless of their political beliefs. The number two then is, how do we create certain channels to ensure that there are direct democratic routes for the people to be able to voice their demands in parliament directly, right? So what we've done as a party is we've amended certain laws together with other parties in parliament to allow for there to be more direct democratic routes. So right now in Thailand, actually, the Thai people can sign their name online or have an e-petition. And if you get 10,000 signatures, which can be collected online rather than offline, which is very burdensome, you can propose certain legislation. If you get 50,000 signatures, you can propose constitutional amendment, and you can also propose for the government to hold a referendum. And I think that channel of that 50,000 signatures is something which I, before I joined the party, also used as a way to try to push forward a constitutional amendment draft that was eventually voted down by the senators. So that's the second part. The third part then, I think, is apart from unlocking that process, is that I think political parties need to also be firm in terms of trying to bring in the contents of the people's demands into parliament. So for example, when the protesters were talking about monarchy reform, they are talking about the problems of the current Article 112. I think as a political party, we need to make sure that those voices are heard inside parliament as well. Now, regardless of where you eventually stand as a party on Article 112, that topic needs to be discussed in parliament. Because especially on this very sensitive issue of monarchy reform, which is something which has not been discussed publicly for a long time in Thailand. I think as a political party, we need to take on that responsibility to make sure that parliament is a safe space to normalize and talk about these issues in a straightforward manner, right? So I think that that's something that we need to do. And also, when we take in the people's proposals, we also need to make sure that we take them in their entirety and not water down their proposals. For example, we're seeing people push for marriage equality. We need to make sure that we stand by that principle rather than water it down and then propose something which is not the same, like the civil partnerships bill, for example, right? And then I think my final point, the fourth thing that as a political party we can do is that we need to fix the system, right? If the system is regressive, we need to fix it. And I think the most tangible and most pressing issue that will be the first step to unlocking everything is the drafting of a new constitution. And actually, the reason I have to join online today is because Parliament is voting on whether to approve the hosting of a referendum on the same day as election day this upcoming year, to also ask people whether they agree that there should be a new constitution in place that is drafted by people that are elected or by an assembly that is elected by the people. So I think those are four things, if I recap very quickly, in terms of what we can do as a political party. Number one is protect civil rights and liberties. Number two is, unlock channels for direct democratic or unlock direct democratic channels for people to participate directly in parliament. Number three is then bring, the civil societies and social movement, the agenda pushed forward by social movement into parliament to discuss and find a solution. And then finally is to fix the undemocratic system by drafting of a new constitution.
As Kun Aitin has mentioned, there's been a push, concerted push in Thailand for reform of the royal institution, and I'm very honored here to be able to introduce Kun Parit, who has, I think, very importantly, when we introduce Kun Parit, is that he is a political prisoner, and he has a lot of contribution in raising what do you call in Thailand, the ceiling, on what people in, especially the new, but not only the new generation, but older generations as well, who have fought before for expressing opinions on the monarchy, on the royal institution freely. Kun Parit has a long history of student activism, and I'm very honored to host him today. So the question here is, what is the challenge of democratization in Thailand? Why the third wave of democracy is so difficult to settle in here compared to in Taiwan, which we can say has been successfully democratized?
First, I want to greet all the panelists and attendees, especially Ms. Lin Fei Fan. As we met in Taiwan on 2016, and we had a good conversation. We had quite a lot of conversation on democratizing and social movement, from which I learned a lot, and my experience learned from your movement in Taiwan help part in pushing forward the democratization movement in Thailand. And I would like to thank Mr. Ananta Parit for recapping the current situation on the institution, as the court has put quite a strict bail condition for me not to have a comment on that institution, on the current situation of the institution. So I wish to bring us back to the past, when the third wave of democratization reached both Taiwan and Thailand. Actually, I think we both country, Taiwan, Thailand, share a lot of faith during the Cold War period. When Taiwan was ruled by the two Jiangs dictatorship, so we were ruled by the military dictatorship of Mr. Our Sarit regime and Thanom regime by that time. And during the 80s and during the 90s, we both Thailand and Taiwan went through a gradual process of liberalization and democratization, and especially after the event of the Black May of 1992, we saw after the clashes between the mass movement and the military, which a lot of that, but the contemporary political critics say that it was the military last grasp to hold the power. The result of the clashes, that massacre, for the constitutional reform of 1997 that gave the birth to the Constitution of 1997, which some of the critics say that it's one of the most democratic constitution Thailand ever had. However, we suffer a quite setback from the coup of 2006, ใช่ไหมปี2006, I suppose. We suffer another coup. It's where the fate of Taiwan and Thailand diverge. Because as of today, Taiwan haven't suffered another coup yet. What happened? I would like to bring all of us to explore the nature of the regime in Thailand. Unlike our neighbor Myanmar, even our authoritarian regime, many of it, or most of it was led by the army, our military junta. The regime survived not solely by the military institution consolidating power, but rather it share power within its elitist connection. Let's say the Burmese regime, the Burmese military hold almost everything. They hold a big company. They run the civil administration themselves. But Thai army is not is not the biggest capital in our economy, and it doesn't run bureaucracy, and also it doesn't hold its own legitimacy. It got approved. It depends on approval from the other higher institution, which the court currently prohibited me from mentioning it. All right. So to summarize the situation on how the authoritarian regime in Thailand works, it's like playing rock, hard, and scissors. When, let's say, when the military fail in popularity, the regime can rely on another player, which I cannot mention it outrightly. All right, but when the popularity of that institution fail, it can rely on power of the military. So unlike the democratization process of so many countries in Asia, that when the power and popularity of the military fail, the democracy rise. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in Thailand. First, and second, I would like to examine the nature of the military of the authoritarian regime in response of foreign dominant power. You know, during the Cold War, Thailand is mostly aligned with the US, and the US diplomatic history show us that they supported any regime, especially an authoritarian one, to combat communism in the late period of Cold War. Also in Thailand, so many groups were even sponsored by foreign power, but after the turn of the end of Cold War, the US policy turned from supporting withdraw their support for authoritarian regime, enticing democratization process in Asian countries. However, it said that if many studies show us that the elite, the Thai elite connection is not so familiar with democracy and didn't accept the democratization process easily. So with the recent rise of China, those connections just changed their sponsor from the US to Chinese one. What is the proof? In the 2006, before the rise of China, after the coup, the US and the EU put a lot of pressure on the regime to bring back democracy, bring back election, and draft a new constitution hastily. So it took only 1 year for them to return the government from military regime to civilian one, even under somewhat disguised regime, which gave a lot of power to an unelected member of the Senate and gave an excessive power to the court to control, to meddling in to control the elected government. But since our latest coup, even the US, even the Western world put quite a ban, a boycott on our trade and our ruling class. This time it was China who it was Chinese support which supplanted the US support. Like after the coup, the Japan government withdrew from the railroad project ongoing before the coup. After the withdrawal, we found that the Chinese project took place, and they implement the railroad project into their Belt and Road Initiative. This is an example how the Chinese regime interfere in our politics and support our authoritarian regime. On the question why Taiwan was successful in democratization, why Thailand has not been, I think it was a Chinese question. Our fellows in Taiwan, the Chinese threat, the Chinese encroachment is clear. And also as the mainland China was ruled by the current totalitarian regime, it shows a clear example to Taiwan what life would be if Taiwan came back to dictatorship again. But for Thailand, we doesn't have that external enemy as an example of how life under dictatorship would be. And so, to say it on diplomatic history, Thailand is the field for competition. Is in Thailand, Southeast Asia is the field for competition between the two superpower of the present. So maybe it's a lot of things to explain why our democratization in our country is not yet successful, but in relevance with our Taiwan friends, I would say geopolitics, the nature of the regime itself, geopolitical situations, and of course the Chinese shadow. I would answer my first question as what I said. I'm so sorry for being not so affluent on English.
Oh, thank you for Khun Penguin for his excellent contribution. We will come back to Khun Fan Lin. For the question we'll ask is forming an international social movement such as like the Milk Tea Alliance, which has involved both the Taiwan social movement and here in Thailand. Does such alliance will increase the such chances of success or not? If so, how?
Okay, yes, I want to first thank you all the panelists for your first round sharing that, especially Aiding's sharing of the message is very strong that and also resonate with me about the past history of Taiwan as well, because in the 80s we also have the some forms of debates on the topic of whether social movements should cooperate with political force, or especially political parties, and especially in particularly the opposition parties. So in 1980s, that the strategy of Taiwanese social movement faced two different directions. One is, or should we go into a direction of making a revolution, or should we make our movement embodied in democratization progress, and make the parliament become the main theme of social change? So but eventually, well, there are some different debates among my time, but after all, eventually that social movement and political movement merge together and become the DPP, the basis of DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party, the current ruling party of Taiwan. It's actually basically actually formed by both political movement and also different types of social movements. So, which is quite important background for Taiwan to transit into the 90s democratization process. As I said, more moderate, more peaceful methods that were used in the past to pursue the social change or political change. So I think there are some lessons or stories that we can compare both Taiwan and Thailand's experience, and to compare what types of obstacles we both facing, no matter it's in the past or the current situation. That's the first my first feedback to Aiding's sharing. And I think for Penguin's opinion about is indeed that China plays an essential role. I'm not sure how many people in Thailand have this kind of awareness of China's influence on the Thailand's political change or regime change. And I think there's a thread that's quite important, is that autocratic sponsorship that we see in Cambodia. And we also saw that in Myanmar as well recently, that when the CCP tried to sponsor some certain military coup, and by their, no matter it's through investments or through bail and roll initiative, or through economic coercions, many different types of method they were using in the past. No matter it's in just as I say, in Myanmar, Cambodia, or even other Southeast Asia countries, or even in South Asia countries as well. So all types of these forms, I would suggest that both Taiwan and Thailand, we can perhaps have a closer cooperation on this topic, and to scrutinize what strategies the CCP is using to dominate or to conduct influence on your own countries. And I think because in Taiwan, they also face a similar situation. They try to sponsor some kind of local collaborators, while Taiwan is a bit different stories from Thailand. But I think that the ways and methods and tools they are using, the toolkits, would be similar. And so, and if we can figure out this problem, and perhaps we can add one more weapon to pursue democratization. And there's one dimension that we can do it together, I think. Another question, back to the moderators' questions. International cooperations by different social movements, for example, such as Milk Tea Alliance, or in the past we got the NOIDA. That's also a very important example of cross-country cooperations. I think all these types of cooperation that need to base on not just a personal experience, but the sharing of knowledge, and also the tactics learning. That in the past, I remember in since 2012, the Taiwan and Hong Kong built very strong alliance that 1 year we sent Taiwan's activists to Hong Kong and to learn the skills of Hong Kong's social movements and also do some exchange on not just information but some types of intelligence about the CCP's tactics or their agenda. And so we do a lot of this kind of type of change. And 1 year they will send the Hong Kong's activists to Taiwan as well. So that's a story of 2012 to 2014, before the Sunflower movement happened and the umbrella movement in Hong Kong happened. And in 2016, we built an alliance called the NOIDA that actually brings the activists from Taiwan, Hong Kong, Thailand, Philippines, Vietnam, Myanmar, and also some people from SFT, the Student for Free Tibet. And so all these activists, progressive movements around the Indo-Pacific region, I think we should keep on this kind of a work and to build the actual alliance, not just, by sharing the knowledge we can, that's a first step. But the second would be to figure out the common agenda. But the common agenda would be, it can be very big as tackling a domestic democratization problem. How can we help? How can we boost from the local news become the international news? That's what we can do. In the past, we also did that when Penguin was in jail and being arrested. And we also launched some kind of international advocacy to support Penguin. And also when our Vietnamese counterparts, a lot of Vietnamese activists, when they're facing trials, facing judiciary situations, being arrested, and we also do similar things. Not just release the press, not just to publish the press information, but also to take actual actions inside our own countries. Like we organize protests, demonstration in front of the perhaps Thailand's embassies and other embassies in so to speak. So that's all what we can do from the civil society aspect. From the political parties aspect, I would say that maybe we can do something from the mutual training. That, for example, this time I'm really honored to join this panel because this is a good opportunity for me to sharing and to listen to your story as well, and to see where could be the common ground for Taiwan, both Taiwan and Thailand, and also see that whether we can find the common strategy to tackle the issue, no matter to deepenize democracy or to seek to combat the outside authoritarian threat. And that's also one thing that we can do together in the future. So I will share my answers first here. Okay, thank you very much. Okay.
Oh, thank you very much. Next, we'll go to Dr. Fang Yu. The question is democratization in the digital age more likely to succeed? And can dictators or their influences really adapt to the digital age? If so, how should we deal or fight it?
Okay, thank you very much. So digital era, for me, there's a dark side and also the bright side of the digital era. That means we have a lot of new tools or new platforms for both the government and the social activists and the people. So for the bright side, for the good one is that for the people, there's more tools, and we can, across the countries like us, we can join the discussion online. And so that makes the mobilization of the masses more easy. And more people can participate in the parties and participate in the discussion of our public affairs. Also, that in the digital era, we see the global alliance, such as the Milk Tea Alliance, and we see that the international media can cover it, can cover the story in your country more easily. And so that we see there's a network from all over the world. For example, in Taiwan, the Sunflower movement in 2014, there's following the Sunflower movement, there's a global support. I mean, so people in all over the world rally to support the Sunflower movement. So that is the power of the digital era. So people can mobilize more easily. But that also means on everything is online, everything is on the internet. That also means the government, the dictator can trace this kind of activities more easily. So for example, in China, there's a powerful tool, especially under the pandemic. They have this code, the tool called the health code. So everyone, you have to use your cell phone if you want to go outside. Then when you go into a supermarket, go into a bus, and go everywhere, you have to scan, and you have to get the green code so that you can proceed. So in the name of fighting the pandemic, they use this to have a monitor on everyone, on every citizens. So a recent story is that in the Henan province of China, so the banking system has a lot of problems. So their people cannot get the money out of the bank. So a lot of people just protest against the bank and protest against the local government. However, after they go on the street to protest and they want their money back, they suddenly find that their health code all go red. Here, their health code just suddenly go red, so they cannot do anything. When they go out, they cannot do anything on that. So because of they participate in the social movement or the kind of the protest against the government. So you cannot go everything. You cannot use your money. And if you know that in China now, it is very popular that they use the electronic payment system, because they don't want to use the paper note, because the fake note is very rampant. So in recent years, they started to use the digital money, but without the code. You always go get the red code, then you cannot go everywhere, and you cannot use your money everywhere. So the government, the dictators, has a lot of new tools to monitor and to control the people under the digital era. So this is the dark side of the digital era. And what makes it worse is that the dictators use this kind of digital tools to monitor the dissidents in democracies. That is to say that because in democracies, you have the freedom of speech. So dictators can buy a lot of news agencies or some local collaborators to spread the information for you online. So it is more easily for the dictator to spread out the ideas and also against freedom and against democracy. And what makes it worse is that the dictators can teach other dictators to use these tools. For example, China now exports a lot of cameras and also selling their technologies, especially the algorithms, to monitor the citizens in other dictatorships. So it is called authoritarian diffusion. So the authoritarian diffusion becoming more easily in the digital era because of these tools, the ruling tools, the technology, the new technology can easily copy to other countries for other dictators. So for me, that makes the democratization or some liberalization more difficult, especially when there's a very strong, very powerful dictators who can teach others or who can help others to use this kind of digital tools to rule. So that is our I mean the challenges for us, for everyone. Yeah. So and for the relationship between China and Taiwan, China specifically is explicitly say that they are using three kinds of warfares against others, especially against Taiwan. That is law warfare, public opinion warfare, and psychological warfare. And with the help of the digital tools, they can spread out the informations, and especially with the so-called informational warfare, and produce a lot of fake news and produce a lot of chaotic information and chaotic discussion online. And also they produce a lot of useless information online to wash out or to just to prevent others to discuss the real important issues. So with the digital tools, that makes the dictators more easily to create chaotic informational flow on the internet. So we have seen various reports or studies on how dictators use or manipulate the public opinion globally. For example, for the recent the Xinjiang the human rights reports issued by United Nations. And in the same time, the US Department of State released a study on how the PRC, the China regime, they manipulate the public opinions. And most of the report is on how they use the online tools to, for example, the AI, also a lot of fake accounts, the fake users online to wash out or to attack those who comment on Xinjiang. So that is in the dark side of the digital era. Also, this is the latest reports by Freedom House. So the global media influence means that Beijing has buy a lot of influence and buy a lot of supports from all over the world, especially in democracies. So they utilize the freedom of speech, the freedom of press, and to spread out the ideas of dictatorship. So that is, I think, the most challenging issue for all of us. That if we want to strive to make efforts to make the world more free. And I think this is the most important challenge for everyone. Yeah, let me just end here. Thank you.
Okay, so next we'll go to Kun Parit. So the question is, what do you think are the obstacles to the democratization process? How can social movements around the world, including of course in Taiwan, help support it?
Yep. There are two parrots, so I assume you mean me, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So I think the question, two parts of that question, right? The question one is like, what are the obstacles of the democratization process in Thailand? And the second question is kind of how can social movements around the world, especially outside Thailand, can play a part? So I think the first question I answered it pretty much already in the first round. So I think let me perhaps kind of skip to the second part. I think the problem statement, just to recap, is how do we reform the current political system in Thailand to be more progressive and more in line with the increasingly progressive society. And I think for me, the first step to unlocking that is the drafting of a new constitution. So then the question becomes, how then can social movements around the world potentially contribute to helping to uplift the state of democracy in Thailand? I think a quick answer to that is that there are many ways that can happen, and it's actually a very important part as well. Because I think right now, when we talk about the battle for democracy or the battle to uplift democracy, it's actually not an agenda of any one particular country, but it's a global agenda that we all share. And the reason I say that is because we've seen it in the past 20, 30 years. I think as many other panelists have alluded to, we have seen declines in the global state of democracy. So then coming back to the statistic, the surprising statistic that I mentioned, that Thailand lies somewhere in the mid-table, right, which seemed too good to be true for a lot of Thai people. Another reason for that is because actually, even though our relative ranking is still in the middle of the table, but the absolute scores of every country has been falling consistently, right? So if you look at the Thailand's absolute score, 6.04 out of 10 is nowhere near being a full democracy, right? I think by definition is still what we call a flawed democracy. And there are, I think, 3 other statistics globally, which I think might paint a pretty dark picture of where the current state of democracy is right now, and why we need to pull together to fight for it. I think the first statistic is actually from the Democracy Index in 2021, where it categorizes countries by different levels of democracy, right? So full democracy, flawed democracy, hybrid regime, and authoritarian regimes. And the surprising statistic is that right now, in the latest ranking or the latest report, there are more people living in dictatorship regimes than there are people living in democratic regimes across the world. So more than half of the world's population currently live in a dictatorship. And I think that's being already very forgiving in the sense that Thailand's status as flawed democracy in this aspect is considered as democratic, right? So more than half are living in countries with a state of democracy that is even worse than Thailand. So I think that's one shocking statistic. The second shocking statistic is that if you look at the Freedom House Index, which measures the level of liberties across the world every year, I think 2022 marks the 16th consecutive year in which the total score or kind of the global average score of freedom has fallen, right? So I think we're seeing, again, regressions consistently in terms of the level of freedom we're seeing in the world. And then the third and final statistic is done by the VDEM Institute report, which basically says that the current level of democracy right now in 2021 is equal to the level of democracy back in 1989 towards the end of the Cold War. And as we know in history, it means that the advances that we've been accumulating since the Cold War in terms of democracy has fallen back to square one, or back to the period at the end of the Cold War. So pretty much the past 10 years have reversed the progress that we have made as a global community in terms of advancing democracy. So that, I think, that encapsulates why this push for democracy is not an agenda of one particular country, but it's something that we need to push for together. And I think concretely there are probably 3 areas or 3 aspects in which we as one country can ask for contributions from other countries to help our agenda. I think the first one is the joint effort to overcome this rhetoric that is trying to prevent democracy from progressing. And I think there are 2 rhetorics that we need to fight in particular. The first rhetoric is that democracy is a Western concept. I think this is a rhetoric. I don't know if you experience this in Taiwan as well, but in Thailand we get this all the time. People who are opposing advancing of democracy in Thailand says that, you know, we are adopting a Western concept and that we are a country from the East, and therefore we should be very wary and cautious of adopting democracy as a Western concept. I think this is something we need to overcome, because I mean, democracy, even though it may have some Western origins historically, but it's by nature a universal value, right? I mean, talking about a system where everyone has an equal right to say how the country should advance, I think it's a pretty much universal concept. It doesn't matter where in the globe you are. It's a concept that can be applied universally. So I think we need to, you know, together overcome this rhetoric and you know, present democracy not as a Western concept but as a global concept. And in a way, one good way that we can do that is to try and basically together make the region more democratic as a whole. Because the more there are examples of, you know, Eastern countries that are democratic or have a strong democracy, then the more that rhetoric that democracy is a Western concept will start to fall, right? So I think that's one important rhetoric that we need to fight together. The second rhetoric then is that democracy is just a matter of free and fair elections. Free and fair elections are a necessary but not sufficient concept, or necessary but not sufficient condition for full democracy. And we have seen, as many panelists have alluded to, the adaptation of dictatorial regimes that have adapted from a more blatant form of dictatorship in terms of staging military coups and taking over power, to more subtle forms of dictatorship, whereby they may get to power via elections or even in some countries via seemingly free and fair elections, but they are managing the country that is against democratic values of, creating a strong system of checks and balances, respecting minority rights and liberties. So I think that second rhetoric is important, is not to see democracy as just being a matter of elections. They are necessary but not sufficient condition for full democracy, because otherwise we're going to quickly fall into the trap of people pointing out that, oh, Thailand's having elections, why are you fighting for democracy? Surely it's already democratic. So I think that's number one, is together fighting this rhetoric. Number two then is, I think, how do we kind of together stand up for the common democratic values and basically hold each other to account on an international setting? And I think given that we are living in a much more globalized world, the opinions that other countries have towards us is becoming more and more important, both economically and socially, in terms of a country's status in the international world order. And actually, even dictatorial regimes, have to abide by international pressure. And I think this is an example that we've seen in Thailand as well. I mean, most recently, 1 year ago, there was a universal periodic review process that happened across the world, right? And of course, there was an evaluation by international communities regarding the status of rights and liberties in Thailand. And even though certain demands that are made or requests that are made by international communities were not adhered to in Thailand, we are seeing certain signs that even the Thai government right now, who is not well known for being the biggest supporters of democratic values, still have to respond to those requests, right? So I think, to recap, back in November last year, there were 194 requests altogether, some overlapping, of course, but 194 requests that were made by countries across the world. 84 did not enjoy the support instantly, so only about 100 were given, an answer in the affirmative that Thailand would respond to those. There were 84 requests that did not enjoy support instantly, but out of those 84 requests, a few months later, about a quarter of them, so 20 plus, were eventually adhered to. So we are seeing some requests that are being made by international communities that pressure the government to respond to. And I think there are two particular examples, which I hope can be signs of progress, right, or signs of evidence of that. The first one is the passing of a law against torture and forced disappearance. So actually, Thailand signed a treaty, I think almost 10 years ago, that they would pass this law. I think it's the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance. But since then, there has been a very slow progress in terms of passing out this law and essentially holding ourselves accountable to that signature. But I think, of course, partially due to domestic pressure as well. But I think the international pressure that came, from the Universal Periodic Review and other processes also helped to push this through quicker. And I think most recently, a version of it has passed Parliament and is now going to be promulgated. Even though there are certain bits that we as Move Forward Party is still not happy with, but at least it's better than what we are, what the current situation right now before that law is passed. I think the second, hopefully, will be evidence of success is also the repeal of the anti-NGO bill, because we're seeing many countries becoming very vocal about this, not just through the Universal Periodic Review process, but we saw, I think, cases of US senators calling for Thailand to repeal this law and saying it will be one of the most punitive laws in Asia in terms of how the government is trying to regulate civil society organizations. So right now, officially, is in a state where the government is, in a process of hearing opinions from different sources. But we are hoping that, well, firstly, the government will not introduce it anytime soon, and then hopefully in the election there will be a change in government, and we don't have to worry about this bill coming out altogether. Of course, there are still gaps. Certain requests by other countries or certain objections by other countries are still not adhered to, whether it articles that I already mentioned about, like articles 112, 116, or the ratification of the Rome Statute that talks about the International Criminal Court as well. These are examples of international requests that are not yet adhered to in Thailand, right? But I think we're seeing that the louder the international demands are, the more likely that the local government will have to respond. And then the third and final point that I think we together have to work on is how do we find, I guess, democratic solutions to certain problems in society right now where past liberal democratic regimes have not been able to solve fully, right? And I think I go into two specific problem statements. I think the first one is the issue of inequality. I mean, during the rise of liberal democracy across the world since the end of the Cold War, coupled with globalization, we have actually seen increasing levels of inequality in many countries that are deemed democratic, right? Now, of course, I'm sure everyone on this panel believes that democracy is still the best system at solving inequality than less democratic regimes. But at the end of the day, provided that democracy cannot solve this inequality or this economic inequality issue, then democracy as a model of government is going to be questioned more and more by the population, right? And I think then it leaves the country more prone to dictatorial regimes who basically exploit this gap and impose certain populist measures that may be able to solve inequality issues on the surface, and then try to parade that as a structural answer to solving inequality. So I think firstly we need to get together and think about how do we, as Democrats, are able to find a sustainable solution to things like inequality, which is just going to be worsened in many countries by trends like aging society or by trends like the climate change issue, right? So I think that's something we need to work together. And of course, we're actually seeing more and more countries becoming more supportive of the issue of or the agenda of creating a welfare state to ensure there is a safety net for everyone in an increasingly uncertain society. And then the second problem statement, I think, is one of speed. This is my personal theory, not backed up by scientific data, but I think every aspect of our lives right now, we are seeing our demands being met much quicker, right? I mean, given the online world, well, we can get to news quicker, we can order food quicker, we can talk to our friends in different countries much more quickly. So people's expectations of change is higher in terms of how fast they expect change to come at. Now, of course, democracy's value is one of ensuring a good systems of checks and balances, but we do not want that to come at the expense of slower decision-making. And if democracy cannot reform itself to find a way to ensure that decision-making can be quicker, we're going to leave ourselves open to dictatorial leaders and elected autocrats who use very authoritarian and populist measures, that can be very quick at making decisions or creating quick results to then exploit and say that democracy is no longer working. And I think this is something that we need to think about. And for me, the solution lies in using technology, right? I mean, we used to think that direct democracy was a dream, right? Because it's impossible to make it happen in practice. But now with the advances of technology, how do we use that to our advantage and ensure that decision making that is democratic and incorporates the needs of everyone does not have to come at the expense of slower decision making. So I think that's something that we together, this issue of finding a democratic solution to solving inequality and finding a democratic system that does not come at the expense of slower decision making, something we need to jointly quickly think of a solution and make sure that is one way we can together provide a front to defend ourselves against attacks by non-democratic forces. So I think three issues. One is overcome these rhetorics that are preventing advances of democracy. Two is standing up and checking each other on certain shared democratic values by international stages. And then number three is finding academically democratic solutions to today's new challenges.
Thank you, Kun Parit Vachasi, for your excellent answer to the question. We'll go to the other Parit, Kun Penguin Parit Chiwala, who we will want to ask why the social movement in Thailand and many other countries in Southeast Asia region have not yet been successful. What are the structural factors that are different from other countries, and how do we overcome it?
Oh, thank you for the question. First, before I answer the question, I would like to share some experience on what we learned from Taiwan and Hong Kong movement, which was a topic discussed by Mr. Lin, my friend Lin Fei Fan, and Kun Parit, another Parit. What I can recall what I learned a lot from a visit to Taiwan and another visit to Hong Kong is first, I'm not sure if you can remember this, Lin, but the Asianization, the localization of democratic value is important. As Kun Parit Vacharasin said that we in Thailand have been plagued with the rhetoric that democracy is such an alien thing, foreign things. It comes from the West. It is not so Thai. Is against our good tradition or anything. But what I learned and I think Thai people should learn is that modern democracy may smells like a bit westernish, but the biggest democracy in the world is in Asia. It was India, and one of the most monumental youth-led democratic movement which captured the attention of almost all around the world. I bet it was Hong Kong protest led by our friends in prison, Joshua Wong and his friends. And the struggle and also the struggle for democracy of our friends in Korea and in Taiwan. These situations, these examples should be sufficient to demonstrate, to show that we Asian also a democrat can be also we Asian country can also be democratic. And I paid a very somewhat attention on the formation of I'm not sure if I understand it correctly, the idea of localism, which I think is gaining quite some traction in Hong Kong and Taiwan in defense against the Chinese nationalism encroachment. I think we in Thailand can learn a lot on it, a lot from it, as I can describe the clashes of idea in our country as the war on definition of the nation. You know, since 100 years, no longer than this, we have been taught that our state ideology have been the country, the religion, and the king. In Thai, we call it Chathakasat. And recently, since the 1932 revolution, another idea on nation, on the concept of nation has risen in challenge of the status quo. It said the country is the people, the nation is of the people. I think is for me it's quite interesting on how you guys in Taiwan form the concept that Taiwan is an independent country, completely separated from mainland China. I think we can learn from the process of forming the idea in strengthening the civic nationalism in the process of forming here. And okay on the question. The obstacle of the social movement in Thailand. First, the law that limit the freedom of expression. As you know, I'm on this panel, but I cannot address even my own history of movement because the court says so. The court put me on the bail condition that if I say something about the monarchy, the current situation, the political situation, my bail can be revoked. And you know, there are plenty, a lot of laws limiting our boundary of freedom of expression, like sedition law, which just simply means don't criticize the government. The lèse majesté law, which means don't criticize the monarchy. Even the emergency decree the emergency decree, which they said they declare for controlling the COVID situation, but in practice it has been used to limit to restrict the freedom of assembly. I have been the court just ruled that I am guilty of violating the emergency decree for holding 2 demonstrations. They found me guilty on 2 counts. Is and this decree, which they said when they first declared, they would say that it would be in use for no more than 3 months, 6 months, but it has been in place for almost 3 years, for almost 2-3 years. And also, in our past half of the century, the assembly, the right to assembly, the right to organize of our people have been continuously limited. For example, forming a political party in Thailand is so difficult. You need millions, tons of money. You need thousands of immediate members, and we need to establish branches of the party all over the country in 1 year, or the party cannot be created. They limit it make the forming of political party much harder, and they put a very strict limit on trade unions. Like if you want to form a trade union, you have to get a permission from the government, and if you go on strike, the employer has the full right to fire you. And on forming social clubs, forming associations, there are also very regulations that don't allow the forming of association and social clubs that involve politics. And like my friends are nativists, who is a human rights defender and have a long history of activism. He was once disqualified from being a committee member, a member of the committee board of a club, human rights, not a club, Amnesty International. Because the Ministry of Interior said that his activism is a threat to, might be a threat to the safety of the nation and the security of the nation and the peace and order. And I'm not counting the bill, NPO bill, which is being proposed by the government in order to curtail the right of NGO organization, even the activist group, independent groups. Like they say that if you form any group without, if you form any group on any and became active on any issue without an assent from the government, you can be jailed. How can we view it? It can be viewed only one way. It is the blatant attack on the freedom of assembly. So what we are facing, first, we are facing a very well-rooted connection of elite. And second, we are facing a very restrictive legal system. And in the bureaucracy, there are a lot, there are plenty officers willing to implement these laws without any second thought. Actually, in Thailand here, many state officials don't even care for law. They just do anything they want to curtail our movement. Actually, I have an observation that the Thai state tactics on oppressing the opposition is quite similar to how the Chinese government suppressed the movement in Hong Kong. They form another group of demonstration and use the group to clash with our movement. They use legal system, like they use legal system and imprison leaders. They respond to any call from the popular section with silence. They just ignore and warn us out. Many critics say that it is how Chinese crushed the Hong Kong movement in 2020. So, and to conclude everything, that our movement, like being chained, being caged with the bureaucracy, with the government, and as there are so many laws restricting the assembly, restricting the formation of political organization, the alliance building with our friends in overseas is also limited. Our capability is limited. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, P. Penguin, for your excellent contribution once again. We're running a bit out of time, so I have to apologize if we might not have time for the Q&A session. But I want to give opportunity for each of our panelists to get some closing remarks. We'll start first with Mr. Fei Fan Lin on this event and what you want to leave here.
Yeah, thank you very much again for inviting me. That I want to just make some quick feedbacks on our panelists sharing. That first of all, that I think just mentioned about the rhetoric of the some kind of doubting the Western democracy, and yeah, we do aware of that too in Taiwan, but more like in the forms of the doubt of the U.S. support or the democratic values. So some people in Taiwan are advocating that democracy is in declining, and there's another model like Chinese governance model will be one way to maintain can sustain somehow. So there is some similar rhetoric in Taiwan as well. That is also what we are facing. So in East Asia or in Southeast Asia, I do see that there is a tendency of promoting so-called Asia model of democracy, and that's certainly I think that's certainly an idea that's totally opposite from our values, democratic way of life, universal suffrage, universal values. I think that's totally opposite of our ideas. So I think that there's indeed we need to figure out like how to deepenize the idea of democracy, how to make it as a real universal values domestically. I mean, in every country, that in Thailand or Taiwan, we both face this kind of a rhetoric, and how do we come back and how can we advocate? I think there is certainly the issues that we can tackle together. And I think one way to do that is perhaps, well, domestic movements, current movement has a different context in different countries. But universal values that we can do together is that advocate for each other. When we're facing the threats from China, and Thailand's activists or Thailand's political force can do the same thing to advocate for Taiwan's sustainability as well, and for Taiwan's democracy as well. And so to speak, that for the Thailand's democratic movement as well, that when we see the movements in Thailand, what we can do in Taiwan is to coordinate the civil society and NGOs to do advocacies in Taiwan, no matter it's in Taipei or different cities, and to do some forms of activities to support and showing the solidarity with the Thailand's activists. That's also what we can do. As in the past, that we have been done this for, I mean, between Taiwan and Hong Kong, we have a lot of occasions doing that. Between Taiwan and Tibetan activists and Uyghurs activists, we also do a lot of this kind of civil stuff. So I believe that there's a room for doing that too. So yes, so indeed, the first thing is that we should tackle the issue of the rhetoric together and to promote the universal values together, no matter in Taiwan or in Thailand, we can do. And another thing is to strategize different movements strategy as well, and to see is there any common ground, so any kind of a common strategies, any kind of a common agenda that we can pursue. For example, that we see the autocratic sponsorship, no matter it's in Taiwan or the country in Southeast Asia. What we can do is to monitoring the situation and also to analyze the situation, and both to think about the strategy to combat that. And also the Belt and Road Initiative, it's become the one way, or depth diplomacy, it's become a one way for China's CCP to conduct the influence into Southeast Asia, and how we can do to help about that, not just from the governmental cooperation, but from the civil society's aspect. I believe from the environmental groups, labor movements, LGBTQ movements, gender equality, a lot of issues we can cooperate with each other. That's certainly what we can do. So I'll end my final remarks here, and thank you very much for inviting me again.
Thank you very much for your presence. We'll quickly jump to Mr. Fang Yuchen for quick closing remarks.
I think Fei Fan has already said whatever I want to say. So thank you again for inviting me to join this discussion. I think all of the discussion is the more the better. I think, yeah, because we have seen so much information from dictators. The propaganda is just everywhere, and they are resourceful, and they use a lot of different kinds of approaches to teach or to tell everyone that dictatorship is better than democracy. I think the basic idea that we can reach a consensus is that we all value democracy, and we should learn it, we should discuss it, and we should protect our ways of life together. But every country and every citizens in different countries faces their own context. So for example, in Taiwan, we also faces a real military threat from China. And in Thailand, I think there's no military threat from other countries directly, but you have to deal with some context of the political systems, and this every citizens in different country has to deal with their own problems, and then further consolidates values or beliefs in democracy. And I think that yes, we should do it with more efforts. Yeah, thank you very much.
Go to Kun Parit Prachanasin for some quick closing remarks.
Yeah, so I mean, thank you everyone for having me here. It was great to learn from all of you. I think just one very quick remark, which is in coming back to that picture that I paint in terms of the tug of war game, right? I think I think just, I guess, one message for the people who are trying to move the society forward, and then one message for the people who are controlling the system. I think the message for the people that are trying to move the society forward, especially the social movements that are happening in Thailand, I think just want to give them a message of hope, because I mean, right now it might feel that they're doing all the pulling and nothing's happening, nothing is moving. But I think time is on your side, in the sense that people are just going to become more and more supportive of a democratic system, more supportive of a democratic society. So I think it's only a matter of time that eventually you can start to move that heavy mountain. And I think we've seen even in Thailand instances where I think the laws that are passed or decisions that are made by members of parliament in parliament are influenced by how loud the voices outside parliament are. I mean, whenever the voices outside parliament fall, it's much easier for members parliament, especially the senators, to just not cater to the demands and then just try to sneak through that process. So I think, yeah, just a message of hope. And then the message to people who are trying to prevent the system from moving forward. I mean, the more you are pulling back the society, the tenser that rope becomes. And I think what we don't want to see is that rope breaking, because that could mean many things, and it could lead to losses, which I hope no one in society wants to see. So I think the quicker you accept kind of the moving forward of time and as society becomes more and more progressive, then the better, and then the more quickly you can stand up and start moving the system together with an increasingly progressive society. So I think I'll leave it with that message. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll continue with Kun Parichura.
Thank you for inviting me here, and it is my quite a very delightful moment to have a conversation with our fellows, our comrades in Taiwan. I think we should have more times, which have more opportunity to learn from each other of our success and failure, because I believe in I believe that we Asians are facing the same threat on democracy, and are still in a long way toward a full democracy, liberal democracy.
Thank you, Kun Parit, for his closing remarks. As an organizer, we would like to thank every single panelist for your very valuable and excellent contributions today, and also the audience members who have taken part in this discussion. Hopefully, this event will be of benefit to everyone who joined and serve as a valuable starting point for maybe people who are interested in going into the deep kind of rich history of social movement of democratization in Taiwan, or even in the social movements in Thailand, political issues, and as well as a call as well for anyone who might be interested in joining our struggle, collective struggle in promoting democracy here in Thailand, in Taiwan, or elsewhere, globally in the world. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining this event. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Right.